It is not a process that we should be thinking about as we try to go to sleep at night. Sometimes you'll dream about it and your subconscious can. It's also fun. You're changing the business. You're figuring out how to take your business from today into a future model that will allow for growth and scale.
Welcome to Finance in the Clouds. Modern finance is broken, forcing finance and accounting teams to work like it's 1985, the year Excel was invented. Here, we talk about the struggles finance teams face in fast-growing companies and discuss how they can spend less time catching up and more time in the clouds. I'm your host, Jake Jones, multimedia producer and brand influencer at Zone & Co., and I'm joined this week by Hamza Zia, Director of Solution Architecture with Myers Holem, and Keith Goldschmidt, VP of Channel Alliances at Zone & Co. Thanks for joining me today, guys.
Of course, thanks for having us, Jake.
Happy to be here.
One of the biggest hurdles to overcome when you're moving your business to an ERP or any new financial system is making sure that your data is ready for the migration. We're joined today by some data migration experts to discuss how you can better prepare your business's data. Keith, Hamza, thank you both again for being here. We're really excited. Hamza, we're really excited to hear your expertise on this topic. Myers Holem is one of the best at doing a lot of this. When we kind of met with you guys, this was a topic that came up instantly of interest to talk about. So tell us a little bit about yourself and Myers Holem, what you guys do, and we'll go from there.
Perfect. Thanks again, Jake, and I appreciate Keith as well for having me here today. Just a quick little intro on myself. My name is Hamza. I'm one of the directors here specifically for our solution architecture practice. So I'm really responsible to sit down with our prospective clients, understand their business problems, and then ultimately outline what that future forward path and goal looks like for them, specifically in NetSuite and our partner solutions, which i.e. is Zone Billing. So we're excited about the conversation here today. Myers Holem, by the way, is an award-winning leader in NetSuite, Boomi, Stripe, and also Google Cloud Platform Solutions. We're based in New York, but we're all over the world. We have about 350 plus consultants in North America, EMEA, the JPAC region, to really meet the needs of our evolving clientele with boots on the ground if that's necessary. And personally, under my team, we have some of the brightest NetSuite consultants in our ecosystem. And we, as I mentioned, work with executives, managers, employees across the enterprise or organization to really gather those requirements, align them, again, as I mentioned, to NetSuite best practices, or again, as I mentioned, using a partner-based best-of-breed approach like Zone Billing to meet the bespoke needs of our clients. And each one of our solutions architects has very, very specific tenured experience in the industries. So for example, SaaS, retail, manufacturing, wholesale distribution, you name it, we have that experience in-house and can really cater to the clientele and the needs that come up.
So excited to hear you talk about this topic, Hamza, because you guys you got the experience down for sure. Keith, let's hear from you. Keith is a veteran to the podcast now. He's the, I think maybe the first returning guest. So you should get an award for that, Keith. But tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here for Zone.
I'm waiting for my trophy. I'm excited. I'm excited to put it on my desk for the next one. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. By way of introduction, my name is Keith. I have been with Zone & Co. for a little over 2 years now. And my role in managing strategic alliances is getting to work with smarter people than myself, like Hamza at Myers Holem and his whole team of experts. I get to help them build their Zone Billing practice and educate them and help them as they perform implementations and really as we go to market together. Before I took over this role on the alliances go-to-market side of the house, I was actually a technical consultant building Zone Billing for 1.5 years. So I spent a lot of time actually inside of data, cleaning data, migrating data, and struggling with data for a lot of time. So this topic is near and dear to my heart.
Exactly. I'm glad to have you, Keith, as well. Your expertise is going to be valuable here. So So we're going to talk a lot about some solutions today and how to help people, how they can prepare and be better handle their data for migration. But let's kind of start here for maybe someone who's not as familiar with what data migration means. It's kind of a hot term, right? What are we talking about here, Hamza? How would you kind of describe data migration to somebody, and why is it such an important issue?
I think before we jump into the context of what data migration is, I think it's important to understand where that data migration specifically lies. So I think, as I mentioned, the more important question is, what is a system? What is an enterprise resource planning tool, right? Specifically here, we're talking about NetSuite, but essentially these tools can be used to perform all of your day-to-day operations, whether it's finance, procurement, sales, supply chain, whatever it may be. And again, one of the more important things here is, as we're seeing businesses evolve and the lines between brick and mortar become more and more blurred, the necessity to have an ERP or a system put in place is extremely important for a system, for an organization, to adapt and grow specifically. So to put that into context for data migration specifically, it's a process of moving data from one system to another. And during that process, there is the accumulation, the planning, the cleansing, and ultimately moving that data from one system to another, which generally revolves around the context of a system or an ERP, right? So the fundamental familiar favorites that we generally see, and I'm sure Keith has seen in his prior life as well, as your chart of accounts, your vendors, your customers, the products you may buy and sell. So there's a host of different data elements that ultimately you move from one system to another. But there's a lot of interworkings in the background and ultimately a black box that you have to work through, which we're going to get to here today of the ins and outs of.
To that point, Hamza, I think most people see the excitement of new software and want to move in the direction of what they are purchasing, what they're planning, what they ultimately want to automate, but they don't think about what they have today and how to get from here to there. Getting from here to there can only happen when you have a map of the current state, and that includes, and I think the most important piece of it is not necessarily the technology, it's the data. Where is it? What is it? And in what state? And the state is often undermining what we can do going forward. So it's the first step in new implementation of software, and it's a continuous step throughout the entire process.
Yeah, it sounds like it's kind of that, like you're saying, Keith, the crucial first step, and kind of really is going to determine how the rest of the implementation goes. But I guess to paint a picture for maybe someone who hasn't gone through one of these implementations before, how long does it typically take, and how does data migration really fit into that? And so I guess what I'm really asking here is, what does good data migration look like, and then what is a worse data migration situation? So Hamza, why don't you start? What's that look like for you?
I think that's a loaded question, Jake, to be honest with you. You're putting me in the hot seat there, but realistically, if you think about it, and I'll just to put it into context, I personally see about 150 to 200 businesses a year with the practice that we have. And within that, I would say, to keep it simple for today's conversation, there's generally three cohorts that a client generally falls in their ERP evolution, and also contextually of their data migration journey. So the first cohort really is, your simple company. You're probably on QuickBooks. You're outgrowing it. You need just that one more niche above on a one-stop shop solution like NetSuite. So here you would probably have minimal customers, minimal vendors. Your practices that you're going through on a day-to-day basis are malleable and can be changed with minimal effort. And more importantly, the data is extremely easy to export with one click of a button, right? And from that standpoint, you can cleanse it appropriately and then map it to NetSuite using guidance from an implementor. So generally, this first cohort probably takes about 2 to 3 months, and that's on the fast end, but it can be done, right? The second cohort is generally what we see the majority of times. This is a medium-sized businesses, transactional volumes are getting high. You're likely on an on-premise solution that's become too slow, can't keep up with your business operations. So you're now looking at, another solution. Now, with these second cohort type of businesses, you generally have business practices that have developed or bad data practices that have developed over the years that you've been potentially on the system. So to unwind that kind of ball of yarn, in a sense, and to move you to another system, there's a little bit more of a hand-holding approach. We're going to have to look your data as well to see, hey, why are there 5 different customers with this 5 different billing addresses? It could technically be the same customer with 5 different billing addresses under that same record, right? So those are the types of conversations technically that we're going to be having, and ultimately that loop to the overall process with the end-to-end process for finance, sales, procurement, etc. So overall, long story short, these generally implementations take about 4 to 5 months. So that's on the fast scale, but the medium-sized businesses. The last one, and I know I'm hogging up a lot of oxygen here, but this is important, is the medium to large size business. So these organizations have probably an on-prem solution as well, but they've grown exponentially. You've got multiple systems holding multiple different data elements, and you're trying to make sense of it now, right? And that's where Myers Holm comes in, and ultimately we sit down with you. We understand the different processes that you've built out in these various systems, and then ultimately kind of go from there. But generally, these types of implementations have a lot of complexity with their data models, data processes, the integrations that you guys may have in place, and potentially even some of the customizations. So kind of unwinding that hairball is about a 6 to 9 month process. But for the folks who are tuning in, it kind of gives you a context of which cohort specifically you fall into, first cohort being the simplest, last cohort being the most complex. And ultimately, you can see if any of those key buzzwords kind of align to what you're doing right now. You can see which kind of time frame you fall under.
Yeah, if I had one piece of advice for customers that I've dealt with from a technical architecture standpoint, is don't get to the point where you're a medium to large business whose data is all over the place in a mess. No doubt, if you are there, Myers Holm can certainly help you clean it up, as Hamza points out. But it's a big project at that point. Think about where your data lives, and how you're going to be able to build a standard, some kind of standard process, even if a standard is 10 different models. Come up with those 10 different models and figure out how they are going to be presented so that you can track them, plan for them, plan your business in reality, because without clean data, you don't know what to expect in the next year or 2, 5, 10 years down the road. You don't know how to plan your business. Becomes really difficult.
And to that point as well, Keith, the planning side of things, right? All of these data migration elements really happen at the beginning part of an implementation. Because if you think about it, you're going to build a pyramid with a strong base, right? And any strong base for an ERP implementation, whether it's NetSuite or any other platform that you're looking at, requires that data to be that strong base. So we front load the implementation. And one of the first conversations that an implementor should have with you is specifically what that data looks like, providing you the efficiencies of specifically moving to that ERP and what you would maybe need to do to align your data from a best practices standpoint to what it would look like potentially in NetSuite. Because every ERP generally does the same thing, but there's specific nuances that you need to accommodate for, in good or bad, which ultimately help customers grow and allow for that flexibility. The main portion here is flexibility. As you guys grow, we don't want you to switch from one ERP to another. We want you to be on that same ERP, realize your ROI, and keep adapting and growing. And having a flexible data model really is that first step to that.
The picture of the foundation for the house is really good, because when the foundation crumbles, the house falls down, right?
Exactly.
And that's exactly what ends up happening with data. And the first thing we do when we engage from a services standpoint is we talk about master data. So there's master data versus transactional data. Transactional data you can recreate. You can figure out how to go back into the actual transactions and capture data that from contracts that didn't get into your model at some point. But master data is the thing that will that will really cause it to crumble really quickly. And Hamza said it earlier: item master, customer master, who you sell to, and what you sell are things that should be very standardized and things that we should know right away when we approach a project.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you guys have hit on so many great conversations, so many great questions I want to dive into. So I want to start here though, just so we kind of get an even clearer picture. Maybe someone listening is one of those larger businesses, and maybe even now they're realizing like, oh, that we are all tangled up. But maybe not. Maybe they did have a good system set up. So I did want to chase this kind of question of what are some of the red flags? What are some of the call signs to you need to really work on your data before you start looking at moving into a new system? So like, what are some of those red flags you guys have seen in your experience, going through a lot of these implementations?
Again, to keep it short here, the telltale signs, the red flags that I would say in the short answer is if you're performing your day-to-day with some sort of shortcut, it's likely the case of bad data, right? So for all the finance folks listening on the call, you probably have the same GL account, let's call it 6005, but it's -2, which is coded to a certain department code. And then you have that same account repeated with -3, -4, -5. And you're baking all of the different variations into your general ledger when you have the opportunity of ultimately segmenting out that information from your natural GL. The reason why you're doing that is because it's a shortcut for you, right? You know the exact code, you know the exact code you need to type into your ERP, and that's fine. But as we mentioned earlier, it doesn't allow you for that flexibility as you guys grow and potentially onboard a new location, grow to a global presence, whatever it may be. So defining these best practices early on is really going to help. For some of the sales folks on the call, to put it into context for you folks, and we talked about this earlier, but it could essentially be having multiple customers that is separated by -HCH or -check, right? You don't need to have two separate customers for that type of variation. That could be done within the ERP. So the reason why you've probably done that is to, again, allow for that shortcut to see, oh, this specific customer I need to do ACH for in that medium is that they want to be communicated. And then the other one is wire or, check, whatever it may be. So that variation and changes is, again, likely because of shortcuts that you're doing in your day-to-day. And if you can count 5 of them on your hands, those are too many. So it's probably time to call an implementor.
And if you're a salesperson on this call, it's as basic as, does your finance person ask you to recreate your sales at the end of the month every single time? Every single time they try to close the books and plan out ARR, do they call you and say, hey, what happened with this deal? What happened with that deal? And what happened with this one? That's pretty simple. You probably have bad data reporting.
And that's so easy to do. I like what you said. It saves you time in the moment, but then later on, as your business grows, you're going to pay for it later. So that kind of leads into our next question. I'm thinking that the answer is start being diligent about your data early, but let's talk about some of the best practices with data management. How can somebody who maybe is in that smaller category, is starting to see a lot of growth, what are some practices they can start to implement now so that when they're a larger system, when they are ready to move into an ERP system or a new ERP system, what are these things that are going to help set them up for success?
Yeah. So from my perspective, the real emphasis on the best practices related to data migration really start from planning. You need to have the appropriate planning, what you're going to be extracting, who's going to be extracting it, how long do you expect it to take, what are the factors that may need to be considered in that specific extraction process, right? If you're different siloed systems, each one of them may not be able to export depending on how old these systems are. So having that conversation early on and not just saying, oh, we'll click a button and it's going to export. Well, do you actually know that, right? All of these things are to be considered when you're planning. And they may seem so simple. And data migration at the end of the day may seem so simple, but there's a lot of interworkings happening in the background, which all stem from that hub, which is the planning side. You ultimately, from that perspective, then need to communicate the process. There's absolutely no way that anyone can kind of take this on their own and perform an entire data migration process for an entire organization. I highly don't recommend that. you need to have what we consider business process owners. So for example, if I'm looking at an organization, there's going to be Cindy, who's the controller. There's going to be, Jake, who's going to be the sales rep. There's going to be, Keith, who's the procurement manager. Each one of those resources know their side of the business extremely well. Leverage them. So let them lead that data migration process, as they will not only become more intertwined into the implementation, but you're actually adding more scalability in terms of change management, as is very important with any migration process and implementation. So all of those two factors ultimately help to get to that last point, which is the actual execution, right? So being able to actually load that system into the data. And again, not turning a blind eye to it and just walking away, you have to validate that. So that's another big portion of it. All of that work that you've just done in terms of planning, communicating, delegating, et cetera, can all go to waste if you really don't sit down and say, hey, what we talked about early, is that really what showed up in the system appropriately? Did it actually come out that way? 9 times out of 10 it does, but for that 1% that doesn't, you want to make sure that you're accommodating in the appropriate format. A couple other things to watch out for is, you don't want to load in thousands of transactions or thousands of data elements into the system without going through a small batch first. You're going to be pulling your hair out and losing it by the time you're 30 if you're not, being careful with that. So take a structured approach, step by step, and ultimately get to a point where it's manageable for you folks. And then the last thing I'll say, because I see this come up on almost every single day, and I'm sure Keith can kind of vouch for this as well, is historical data migration. We see a lot of our clients come to us and say, hey, you know what, I know we were on, QuickBooks for over 5 years. I want every single transaction that took place in QuickBooks to also be in my new ERP. There's a lot of work that happens there, folks, a lot. A lot of the work generally falls on the client because they have to be the ones who are essentially extracting that data, mapping it potentially to the new chart of accounts that the implementer would be creating for you, right? Because there's some inefficiencies that are currently existing in your chart of accounts. And then ultimately importing that into NetSuite. It's a monumental effort. So what I would recommend is you really look at that process and determine what the best route is for you folks. And speaking with a Myers-Holm type of client organization can really help you define what that strategy looks like. So you're not only meeting your compliance needs, but also being able to scale and not bring in bad junk data into the new ERP.
You said a couple words that make me think of my audit background between compliance and business ownership. And I want to add, take note of access as well. So who is manipulating and adding new and deleting old data from your systems is something that should be considered as you do an implementation of new software. So you don't want your salespeople adding new products, most likely. Maybe that's your process. I won't tell you who should be the business owner, but likely somebody else is adding products and items into your category. You don't want salespeople adding vendors. That's for certain. So take note of the master data, who has access to it, and who's manipulating it. I think that's a good way to maintain its cleanliness.
So many great tips there, guys, and a lot of really interesting stuff to hear. Kind of, you don't think about it going in. I love the idea of making these. I forget exactly how you worded it, but the people who own the data and own a certain set of data, and kind of to your point, Keith, keeping that group small, where you have kind of one person who's kind of over or has a say over this, and it's not available to everybody else. So that's some really, really exciting stuff. Those are kind of best practices and things that people can do early on. Is there anything in addition to that say you are one of these large companies, you've got a big twisted ball of yarn, like you were saying, Hamza, what can they do now as they look to go into a ERP system? Obviously, they should be calling Myers-Holm and getting your assistance. But what are some things they can do even before getting to that call? What if you had a client like that who had that twisted ball of yarn? What would you hope they're doing as they get in the call with you? What's going to make your day saying, okay, this is a ball of yarn, but we can untangle it? What's those things going to be for you?
The biggest thing is the conversation internally of what they need to do. So what I mean by that is that an implementor like Myers-Holm can always come in and say, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. But if you're sitting there and reflecting on, hey, from a sales operations standpoint, we've never been able to do this well. Well, why have you not been able to do that well, right? Or from a finance perspective, we haven't been able to do this, or we can't do our eliminations in our current system because of XYZ. Well, why are you not able to do that? Sit there in a boardroom, whether it's for an hour or two, and really reflect on each one of those, as I mentioned earlier, Jake, those business process owners, to outline what it is, what's working for them in their current processes for data, and what isn't, right? And it generally stems from processes that they're going through from a day-to-day standpoint. So as long as they can sit there, reflect that on that, and detail that out, you're coming to the table for a Myers-Holm type of implementation with half the work generally done. We know what we need to poke and pry at, as opposed to us actually going there and yanking it out of you folks, right? So it really helps us, once the conversations have been kicked off internally, for us to have a better, newer way of doing things for that process. And strategically, for all those leaders in those organizations that are having and hosting that quorum, in a sense, you're kind of breaking away from tradition. You're allowing your organization to be able to perform change management internally, so that mindset that's associated with moving to a new system or moving to doing things in a different way or light has now kind of been opened. So you can start introducing this change, because it really is a transformation that you're going to be going through. I'm not trying to get corny here, but this type of mindset is extremely important for you as an organization to evolve and grow. And this ultimately is that first step.
Yeah, I agree. It truly is a transformation of your business. Hamza, I think you alluded to the point of figure out what you need as a business, which to me is define the data points. So if you're talking about transactional data, for instance, define exactly what 20 data points that you need. Think fields on a record, down to the field level. What fields do we need on every single one of these opportunities, on every single one of these vendor transactions? Get to that granularity, to the point where you can define for consultants like MHI exactly what you want to be capturing and tracking to be able to report on going forward, and then you can dig into those transactions historically and be able to redefine that if necessary.
Great advice, guys. And of course, always go to find somebody who can help you implement. Myers-Holm, again, is one of the experts here. So they can absolutely help your business get to the end goal there. As we kind of we're coming to time here. Is there anything else we haven't really talked about yet in regards to data migration that somebody who's looking to go into an ERP system needs to know or understand about the process?
It's just going to be a process, and you got to buckle in, and as long as you're planning for it and being able to take the step-by-step approach, it's going to be simple. But again, it comes back to that planning piece.
Approach it with an idea that you might have fun and be challenged. It is not a process that we should be thinking about as we try to go to sleep at night. Sometimes you'll dream about it, and your subconscious can go awry for certain. But it's also fun. You're changing the business. You're figuring out how to take your business from today into a future model that will allow for growth and scale.
So Hamza, Keith, we've had a great conversation about data migration today. Lots of great tips, lots of great best practices that people can start to prep for as they maybe are looking to joining an ERP system in the future, or maybe right in the middle of about to take that jump. So I hope the audience has learned a lot, can better prepare for when they are getting ready to move their data. So thank you both for sharing your expertise, your experience. It's been a great conversation. So
awesome. Yeah. And thanks, Jake and Keith, for allowing this type of medium to have this conversation. Really appreciate it, as I mentioned previously, and looking forward to future conversations. And for any of the clients that joined the call here today, or prospective clients, if you have any of those telltale signs that we talked about earlier, or are having issues with data migration, or potentially just looking to have a conversation about what this transformation can look like, more than happy to set up a call and go from there. But appreciate the time today, Keith and Jake.
Yeah. Thanks for having us, Jake. Thank you so much for being here, Hamza. Appreciate all of your background and expertise that you brought to the call.
Now we want to hear from you. How are you preparing your company for data migration in the future? Let us know by emailing hello@zoneandco.com. Finance in the Cloud now posts bi-weekly on Fridays. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to Finance in the Clouds wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us on YouTube on the Zone & Co YouTube channel. And we'll see you next time. Bye.